While Trump was shaking hands with Xi Jinping in Beijing, Iran was seizing ships. While Trump and Xi agreed that the Strait of Hormuz must remain open, Iran's senior vice president was telling state television that the strait belongs to Iran and that Tehran would not give it up at any price. His exact words, "It has always been our property." And while American diplomats were calling the Beijing summit a success, Chinese ships were quietly passing through the Strait of Hormuz under new Iranian protocols, protocols that Iran established unilaterally, that require ships to contact Iran's new Persian Gulf Strait Authority, and that charge tolls that Iran has the sole authority to set. I want to spend the next 15 minutes explaining what these three things happening simultaneously tell you about who is actually winning the diplomatic and strategic battle for the Strait of Hormuz, because the picture that emerges when you hold all three facts together is fundamentally different from the picture being presented to the American public. The five conditions Iran just gave America. Let me start with what Iran said directly this week, because the five conditions Iran has now placed on any resumption of talks with the United States are the most explicit statement Iran has made of its negotiating position since this conflict began on February 28th. Iran's semi-official Fars news agency reported, citing an informed source, that the Islamic Republic will not enter further talks with the United States unless five conditions are met. They are specific, they are demanding, and they tell you precisely what Iran believes its leverage is worth. First, the United States must pay reparations for the war. Iran is demanding that America compensate Iran for the damage caused by Operation Epic Fury, the 40-day bombing campaign, the naval blockade, the strikes on Iranian civilian and military infrastructure. America has never paid war reparations to any adversary in any conflict since World War II. Iran is demanding it as a precondition for talks. Second, America must accept Iran's sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. This is the most strategically significant demand. Not just that Hormuz reopens, that America formally recognizes Iranian sovereignty over the waterway that carries 20% of global seaborne oil supply. The demand effectively asks America to acknowledge that the legal status of the strait changed as a result of this conflict, that Iran's assertion of control during the war converted a previously internationally recognized free passage into an Iranian territorial asset. Third, all American sanctions on Iran must be lifted before talks begin, not as part of a deal, before talks begin. Iran is demanding the removal of the primary economic instrument of American leverage as a precondition for negotiation, not as a concession Iran receives in exchange for a concession it makes. Fourth, American and Israeli forces must withdraw from all positions they took during the war. This demand addresses the military posture changes that occurred during the conflict, naval assets, forward deployed forces, operational positions that America has maintained since the ceasefire on April 8th. Fifth, Iran must receive security guarantees against future military action, not a diplomatic assurance. Formal security guarantees, presumably requiring multilateral backing, including from China and Russia, that America will not launch another military campaign against Iran. The White House is again unlikely to accept these demands. That assessment is correct. But the strategic significance of the demands is not whether America accepts them. It is what the demands reveal about Iran's assessment of its own position. A country that believes it lost the war does not demand reparations as a precondition for talks. A country that believes it lost the war does not demand formal recognition of its sovereignty over the waterway it closed. Iran presented these five conditions because Iran's leadership believes, based on 80 days of evidence, that it has the leverage to make them. Whether America accepts them or not, the demands define the floor of Iran's negotiating position. Any deal that does not address these five elements is a deal Iran will not accept. It has always been our property. What that statement means, Iran's senior vice president, Mohammad Reza Aref, said on state television that the Strait of Hormuz belongs to Iran and Tehran would not give it up at any price. He said, "It has always been our property." I want to address this statement directly. Because it is not a negotiating tactic. It is a statement of principle that reveals what Iran's government believes this conflict has established. Before February 28, 2026, the Strait of Hormuz was governed by international maritime law, specifically the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which establishes the right of transit passage through international straits. No country owned the strait. Iran had sovereign rights over the territorial waters on its side, but the transit of commercial and military vessels through the strait was an internationally recognized right that no single country could unilaterally revoke. Iran closed the strait on March 4th. It subsequently established the Persian Gulf Strait Authority to regulate and collect tolls on transit. It has been selectively allowing ships from countries it considers friendly, including China, while denying transit to others. And now Iran's senior vice president has said the strait has always been Iran's property. This is not rhetoric. It is the articulation of a new legal claim that Iran is advancing through facts on the ground. Every day that Iran enforces its authority over the strait, every ship that pays Iran's toll, every vessel that contacts the Persian Gulf Strait Authority for clearance, every Chinese tanker that passes under Iran's protocol, strengthens the precedent Iran is building. The top U.S. commander in the Middle East said this week that Iran's military capabilities have been dramatically degraded, but that Iran's leaders are impacting shipping with rhetoric alone. This is the most honest assessment any American official has offered of the current situation. Iran does not need functional military superiority over the U.S. Navy to enforce its claim over Hormuz. It needs sufficient threat credibility that commercial shipping companies, insurance underwriters, and oil traders price Iranian control into their decisions. It has achieved that. A ship was seized off the UAE coast on Thursday. An Indian cargo ship sank off Oman after being attacked. The rhetoric is backed by action. What China passing through tells you about the deal here is the most important diplomatic fact of this week that the coverage has underweighted. While Trump and Xi were meeting in Beijing, while the White House was announcing that both sides agreed the Strait of Hormuz must remain open, Iranian semi official news agencies were reporting that Chinese ships had begun passing through the strait under new Iranian protocols. Tehran had agreed to facilitate the passage of several Chinese vessels following requests from China's foreign minister and Beijing's ambassador to Iran. The Chinese ships passed through the strait while Trump was in Beijing. They passed under Iranian protocols, not American ones. They passed because China asked Iran, not because America opened the strait. And they passed as proof that the mechanism for Hormuz transit that is actually functioning is the bilateral Iran China arrangement, not the American naval escort mission that lasted 48 hours and guided two ships before being paused. I want to explain what this specific fact means for the diplomatic architecture of any eventual settlement. America has been conducting this conflict on the premise that sufficient military and economic pressure on Iran will force Iran to open the strait on American terms. The maximum pressure strategy, bombing, blockade, sanctions on Chinese companies, Project Freedom, was designed to make Hormuz closure more costly for Iran than Hormuz opening. That strategy has not worked. Iran's oil exports continued above pre war levels because China's shadow fleet kept delivering. Iran's financial system continued functioning because China's CIPS payment system processed the revenue. And the strait is now opening not through American pressure, but through bilateral negotiations between Iran and China that Washington was not part of. China's ships passed through Hormuz while Trump was in Beijing. The message could not be more explicit. China does not need American permission to transit Hormuz. Iran gives it. And the price of Chinese transit is Chinese cooperation with Iran's management of the strait, not American. What the ship seizure and sinking tell you: one ship was seized off the UAE coast and taken toward Iranian waters. Another, an Indian flagged cargo ship, sank off the coast of Oman after an attack sparked a fire aboard while it was en route. Both incidents happened this week. Both happened while the Beijing summit was producing statements about how both sides agreed Hormuz must remain open. The gap between the statement and the reality is the measure of how much the Beijing summit produced on Hormuz. The United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations Center confirmed the seizure. The British military confirmed the vessel was heading toward Iranian waters. Indian authorities confirmed the cargo ship sank after an attack. Iran's judiciary spokesperson said Iran has the legal and judicial right to seize oil tankers in the Strait connected to the United States because America has violated international maritime laws. This last claim is the most significant. Iran is not presenting its seizures as acts of war or aggression. It is presenting them as acts of legal enforcement. Iran, as the sovereign authority of the Strait, exercising its judicial rights to seize vessels that violate its authority. That framing is important. A country that seizes ships as an act of war can be confronted militarily. A country that seizes ships as an act of sovereign legal enforcement is making a claim that requires a legal and diplomatic response, not just a military one. Iran is not saying it attacked ships. It is saying it legally seized them under its authority as the governing power of the Strait of Hormuz. This is the doctrine that Iran's senior vice president articulated. The Strait is Iran's property. The seizures are enforcement actions. The five conditions are the terms of any future arrangement. And China, the country whose ships are already transiting under Iranian protocols, is the model for how any country that wants to use the Strait will need to arrange it. What this means for American families. The American families paying 52% more for gasoline than they were on February 27th need to understand what this week's developments mean for when that premium ends. The Beijing summit agreed that Hormuz must remain open. Iran seized a ship and sank another. Iran gave America five preconditions that America is unlikely to accept. Iran's senior vice president said the Strait is Iran's property, and Chinese ships pass through under Iranian protocols, while American ships have not been conducting escort operations since Project Freedom was paused 3 weeks ago. None of those facts suggest that the gasoline premium is ending soon. The economic architecture that Iran has built around Hormuz, the Persian Gulf Strait Authority, the toll system, the bilateral arrangements with China, the selective transit permissions for friendly countries, is not dismantled by a summit communique. It is dismantled by a deal that addresses Iran's five conditions, or by a military campaign that Iran's leadership has stated it is prepared to resist, or by a multilateral arrangement that gives Iran what it needs diplomatically. The one-page memorandum that was supposedly close to being signed 3 weeks ago is nowhere in the current reporting. Iran's five conditions are what is in the current reporting. The gap between a one-page memorandum and five preconditions that include war reparations and sovereignty recognition is the specific distance between where the deal was 3 weeks ago and where it is today. Watch Iran's Persian Gulf Strait Authority. If it begins approving transit for non-Chinese vessels, if ships from Japan, South Korea, and European countries begin passing under Iranian protocols, the commercial shipping market will follow. Not because America opened the Strait, because Iran allowed it. That would be the specific moment when the gasoline premium begins to come down, not before. Iran said it owns Hormuz. It gave America five demands, and China's ships passed through while Trump was in Beijing. That is the Strait of Hormuz on May 17, 2026, 87 days after the war began.